how did I get into Kruger? Yeah, it's a very interesting story. And I didn't know at that time, but I think it was destined for me to go to South Africa, to go to Kruger, or to go to the African bush. And this was decided on my 16th birthday. So, this is a book which changed my life, which transformed my entire way of looking at the bush or way of looking at my life. And this is The Lightning Bird by Lyle Watson. And my aunt, which gave me a gift, birthday gift, was this book. The translation of this particular book in Marathi, my mother tongue. Now, this is a guy who actually is originally a white man, a British, and he went out to South Africa and ventured into the African tribal land on his own. Now imagine this is in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, when the white explorers they moved only in jeeps. This guy refused to go in jeeps. He got down from his jeep, walked on his own, and stayed with these tribes, absorbed their culture, understood and felt the essence of life. And eventually, he became a white shaman, the first ever white shaman in the African heritage. Now, he inspired me a lot. I started my first venture into a jungle was when I was around 18 years old, and since then, in the next 10 years or 12 years, I had traveled almost entire India, visiting almost all national parks, and really amazed by the biodiversity and how the natural world exists outside our box of the urban life. And with that, I was involved in various education activities. I was involved in wildlife photography. I had a travel agency on my own, so I started conducting tours for safaris. I was a safari guide. But like all naturalists in India or all naturalists over the world, Africa started really beckoning, started haunting me. And then you once you start, you need to get to the continent, the cradle of humankind and the cradle of the wildlife. That's Africa. That's Africa for me. And then I suddenly the memories of Adrian Boshier and his adventures and the bush in the South Africa, they all sprang up as if they were hidden or slept or sleeping for so many years. And then I decided to go to Africa. Now, when I decided to go to Africa, my first and natural choice was South Africa. Now, remember, those were the days where internet was not as developed or as strong as it is today. So we had some books and we had some references and we had some travelers who had come from Africa to guide us. And then I realized that I had a very strong affinity or very strong admiration for the South Africa, for the Republic of South Africa. Of course, one reason was Nelson Mandela, one reason was Cape of Good Hope, the point which I have been studying since my school days, then wild expanse that exists in South Africa. And then I signed up for this game ranger course in the Kruger National Park. And I'm so glad, I'm so delighted to tell you that I am the first game ranger from India, not from South Africa, not from Durban, not from Pretoria School, but from India, to have cleared this exam and top it. So what's a game ranger? Let's come to that. When I say I'm a ranger, I have certain duties, I have certain responsibilities, I have certain training to undergo, and of course I have some privileges. Now let's understand how the Kruger National System works. I'll give you a very brief introduction to it. The Kruger National Park is actually bordering with two countries. On the east, it has got Mozambique. On the north, it has got Zimbabwe. And on the northwest, it's called Botswana. Now, what the three governments have done is the areas or the borders which are on the fringe of the Kruger National Park have been declared as national parks. So, what happens is the three governments together they have created transfrontier parks which extend right from South Africa into Mozambique, into Zimbabwe, into Botswana. the extended Kruger Park or the greater Kruger Park for your exploration. So one can go into Mozambique, one can go into Botswana, one can go into Zimbabwe, and mind you, these are all different ecozones. So this is the best privilege that one can get. The main park, Kruger National Park, is operated by SANParks, a body of the South African national parks. And the local tribes, the local stakeholders are involved in the conservation part in a very unique and a very different way. So what the SANParks guys have done is, when they formed this particular park, what they did is they actually evacuated the old villages, the tribal villages, and settled them outside the park on the border. Now, as you know, Africa is not a continent which is inhabited by a particular race. There are various tribes, there are various customs, there are varied lifestyles, and there are various beliefs. So, to incorporate or to include all the existing tribes and their participation in the conservation process, the South African national parks, they designed a system. What they did is, in compensation to the villages for the tribals, they gave an equal part of land very adjacent to the Kruger National Park. Now, this is very important because it was very difficult to alienate the local people from the bush that they lived with. Their entire life is circling around the wildlife, around the natural resources, and the natural components. It's more or less like the Indian heritage. We relate everything to the nature gods. So similarly the African tribes, they live with nature, and that's the reason they were allotted these private land, which is called as private concessions, on the border of the Kruger National Park. Now, what happened is, as the population increased, it increased exponentially, the human population. And the wildlife or the Kruger National Park say it has got a fixed boundaries. So, in any case, there is going to be competition of for the resources between the humans and the wildlife. So, as the park developed, as things went ahead, tourism also flourished. So the sandparks decided to include these local stakeholders in this ecotourism activities. So the private concessions were run by the tribal people, by the tribal leaders. They have their private lodges, and they recruit or they employ local people in this business. So the revenue that is generated from this particular activity goes to the welfare of the tribes. I participated in 3 programs in the conservation of the southern part of the Kruger. Then I get a chance to work with the anti-poaching squads, which is a serious business in Kruger. This is a very, very important department, very important activity, very essential department required for the for the existence and the persistence of the wildlife in the Kruger National Park. Apart from that, education, awareness, public outreach, there's no limits. So one can participate in n number of activities being a ranger, and that makes the Kruger National Park a wonderful experience as a ranger for me. The ecotourism in Kruger National Park is altogether different from where you find in the rest of the world. Now, in Kruger, the sandparks have a very different ideology. The main adventure in Kruger is self driving. The moment you enter the Kruger and the elephants come in, the rhinos come in, the lions are close to the car, the thrill that you experience when you get closer to the animals, the distance, the safe distance you have to keep between yourself and the animals, and plus enjoy the wildlife without disturbing it is something absolutely amazing. There are sighting boats, which is a very interesting thing. The tourists, they come back from their safaris and point where they have seen the big five. And then the next day or the same evening, you can actually get to track these big five with the highest possible probability. This is very unique in Kruger, wherein the sandparks, they have put up all kinds of maps at every camp. So the radial roads from each camp are marked very clearly. They're all numbered. So once you say, I have seen a rhino on S32, and you go, the next tourist goes there and he actually gets to see a rhino with a maximum possibility. This is a very interesting thing, and I thought it was very user friendly, very tourist friendly. Then there are night safaris. This is again a very special thing. It's official. You get into the sandparks car or you get into the sandparks truck and go with the official guides. Now, the role of the shamans in an African village or African community is very critical. The Westerners straight away named it as witchcraft or black magic, which is not actually a fact. The things that we don't understand, we tend to give some very good names to it, and that's one of the reasons why it's called black magic or witchcraft. But one has to understand, and I think the people from the Asian culture or the Indian culture can very well understand this or appreciate this. There is a counselor, there is a naturalist, or there is a naturopathist existing in every village, in every community, who helps, who guides, and who consoles the people during during the bad times. And the shamans play the same role, exactly the same role for the African tribes. I made it a point actually to visit one of these shamans and requested her to demonstrate the rituals which I had heard of, read about it for many years. And then there is this pouch. Now in India we have this pouch. My grandmother used to have this pouch. And the shaman opened a similar pouch with all kind of bones, all kind of weird things that one would find. Shells, bones, rings. And then she just gave it into my hands and said, okay, just hold it in your hands and blow your moya or your life into it. Like this. That's how I did. And then I just placed the entire entire collection in front of her, that I would say. And then she looked at it and then she started telling my future. Now, this is where the African community or the African tribes, they believe in the shamans. This is a way of knowing their future. This is a way of knowing if there are any dangers coming in. This is a way of knowing if there is going to be prosperity, if there is going to be good rains, good crop, or there is going to be a child in the family. You believe it, you may believe it, you may not believe it, but the Africans, they do believe it. So, what the South African government or the South African National Parks has done is, they have actually involved local tribesmen or local people into the conservation effort. So what they do is they train these people or the tribal people as guides, as local guides, and then they make them understand why conservation of these species is important. Wildlife tourism is a philosophy by itself. You are actually entering someone else's home, you are actually entering someone else's domain, and then you try to adjust with the host, which are the wild animals in this case. So, the main responsibility of the tourist is to actually respect the wildlife, give them sufficient space to move freely in their home, and then establish a bond wherein they come closer to your vehicles, they come too close to you, then they come and stay with you, and you can get longer sightings. This is the whole idea of tourism, and I think in Kruger National Park, you see the best examples of the tourists actually getting along very well with the wildlife.